Charter Local Edition with your host, John MacDonald.
Hello, we are visiting with Public Service Commissioner Travis Kavulla today. Travis, I want to welcome you to the show and thank you for taking a little time.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
So for people that don't follow the Public Service Commission on a daily basis, tell them what you are charged with. You actually have a large portfolio of regulatory issues that you cover.
They can be forgiven for not following us, John, but it's probably one of the most obscure government bodies you've never heard of, but important too. Basically, if you take service from a company and you don't have a choice in your provider, natural gas, electricity, some telecommunications, certain privately owned water services, chances are the PSC regulates that industry. We set the prices they're allowed to charge, we set the terms and conditions of service, we regulate their rates essentially, make sure that their position in relation to a captive set of customers doesn't result in an abusive relationship with their customers.
Okay, and so what are some of the issues that people would understand that you're involved in right now, some of the things that are going on that are before the PSC?
Sure, there's always sets of rate increases. Electric utilities frequently ask for rate increases. Montana Dakota Utilities has a very large one, 21%, pending before us at the moment. Northwestern Energy is a company that many Montanans are familiar with. They're asking the PSC to recover from consumers about $8.5 million that resulted from an outage at the Colstrip power plant a couple of years ago. So those are some examples. We also deal with mergers and acquisitions. There's been a lot of controversy about the City of Missoula's water company. The PSC has been involved in that, for instance.
Sure. And one of the issues right now, too, that I think the PSC is going to end up playing a role in is the EPA regulations on emissions from power plants, of coal-fired power plants. Talk a little bit about that, what the PSC's role will be or is in that, and where you see that playing out.
Sure. So for a little background, the Clean Air Act, which was implemented in the 1970s by Congress, is being used to regulate carbon dioxide emissions from existing power plants. It really is an EPA regulation that is going to reshape the electric power industry like nothing we've seen in the past 3 decades. And so it's sort of all hands on deck, both environmental quality regulators, utility commissioners like myself, governors and legislators across the country are trying to cope with this. And the EPA gives a target to every state that has coal-fired power plants, including Montana. And the country is really divided into winners and losers, and I'm sad to say Montana is one of the bigger losers in that framework. We're going to have to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by about 30 to 40% beginning in 2022. And what that means for Montana is not only a closure of a lot of coal capacity that we have in our state, but also a halt to some of the mining operations that send coal to other states in the Midwest that rely on coal capacity.
And so what is the PSC's role in a situation like that? Obviously this is an issue of federal enforcement, but where does the PSC fall into that?
So every state is going to have to write a state plan to comply with this federal rule. The PSC is really one of the 2 or 3 stakeholders involved in the writing of that plan. We're going to give input to Montana's Department of Environmental Quality, and ultimately when the bill comes due, because this regulation will cost a lot of money, we'll be the ones overseeing whether and how it's passed along to consumers in the state of Montana by the industries that we regulate, Northwestern Energy and Montana Dakota Utilities. So it's a big deal. Montana has until November of next year to submit a kind of preliminary proposal and can get an extension until 2018. But it's really going to reshape the industry in a big way. And it's going to have a lot of impacts on local Montana communities, not just Colstrip, but in a lot of places that depend on the coal industry.
And you characterized it obviously as a losing proposition for Montana in many ways. It's obviously a very controversial subject, carbon emissions and that type of thing. But talk a little bit about when you mentioned the loss. Is there an economic figure tied to the downside of this issue?
I think there is. I mean, coal mining operations and coal generation in Montana. Montana's home to the 2nd largest power plant west of the Mississippi that burns coal at Colstrip. You know, they've pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into the Montana economy over the years. And that's a big loss that has to be either made up for somehow, or the state budget, for instance, and school budgets have to decrease to absorb that loss. There's the other loss that goes on the back of the consuming public of services like electricity. I mean, a lot of these coal plants have not been paid off fully by the utilities that own them. So their consumers will end up getting stuck with a bill for a plant that may be prematurely retired, and they're also going to have to pay to build a new power plant, whatever that may be, probably something running natural gas with maybe a wind farm backup. You know, Montana risks, in the worst scenario, losing a lot of its coal capacity, which it exports to other states, and not actually replacing it with any economic investment.
Right.
So a lot of the transmission lines you see running around the state might actually be downrated in their capacity and in their actual transmission of energy. It's not a pretty situation.
Let's talk about another issue related to power, and that is net metering. And for folks that don't know what that is, maybe you can explain a little bit. But that was obviously another big issue during the 2015 legislature. Talk about what that is, kind of where you were at. I know you were at some of the hearings, at the very least to kind of listen in and get information or provide information. But tell people what net metering is and where we're at on that issue.
So net metering is something that happens when the consumer produces his or her own energy using a rooftop photovoltaic solar panels or a small wind turbine, or really anything, even a small biomass digester on their property to produce electricity. And in times when they produce a surplus, they feed it back onto the grid. They receive a credit for the energy they produce, and that credit is applied to their bill during the times when they're mainly consuming, when the sun goes down or when the wind isn't blowing.
Right.
So it's an innovative, it's something we didn't really see a lot of except for rooftop solar water heaters in the past. But now there's a real push, and obviously retail electric rates aren't going down. But what is going down in price is the cost per watt of solar panels, which has dropped dramatically over the past several decades, to the point that together with an investment tax credit, solar panels are actually becoming competitive with utility-generated power, with the federal subsidy, that is. So, it's something we have to get right now. If we were to charge people for the total all-in cost of using the grid, per month, it would be about a $25 fixed charge. People only pay $5. So there's a lot of prices that are going to have to get readjusted as more and more people hook up to the grid using their own power facilities.
Well, and the legislature looked at it. They had a number of bills, but in the end, I think it's something we'll probably be looking at again in the future, too.
I think that's safe to say, John.
Yeah. Well, we have been visiting with PSC Commissioner Travis Kavulla. Travis, appreciate you stopping by today and taking a little time out of your schedule.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Charter Local Edition has been an exclusive presentation of Charter Communications, providing original programming.